It is recording.
Okay, welcome. This is Kaisa's Kitchen, and I'm glad that you're joining me today. We are going to learn how to make seitan. It's a funny name, but it is the name of a wheat substitute that's made from vital wheat gluten. So I'm going to tell you all about it, but I want to show you how to make it. It's something that I make often. It's high in protein. It is good if you want to get more protein in your diet, but don't necessarily want to eat more meat. And it's kind of a funny thing to make. So I thought it'd be really good to show you how to make it. So the first thing is, I'm going to get my hair out of the way. Second thing is, I'm going to tell you about the ingredients that are in it. This is a bag of premium vital wheat gluten. And what that means is it's a big bag of gluten. So if you are sensitive to gluten or celiac, you will not want to make this recipe. It would be very dangerous to your digestive system. But for those that can have wheat and can have gluten, this is a really great thing to know how to make. It's expensive to buy, and I haven't enjoyed the consistency of the kind that you buy at the store. So I've really enjoyed making it. It's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. So we're going to be making a dough, and it's like a dumpling dough almost. And then we're going to be boiling it like you would a dumpling, and it's going to poof up, and it's going to be really fun for you to see. And so I'll walk you through the whole process. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make the dough. I use coconut amino acids instead of soy sauce. We have some soy allergies in our family, and so we like the coconut aminos. The recipe calls for any sort of soy sauce. There's Bragg's liquid aminos, tamari, which is a soy-free one, are what I'm going to be using today in place of soy sauce in the recipe. Tastes great. The other thing I'm going to be using, I'm going to just show you some of the ingredients now, is this is called organic chickpea miso. And I use this instead of bouillon because bouillon has yeast and a few other ingredients in it that our family can't have. And we're going to be making a broth later to put the dough into, and so it just needs some flavor. And this gives it a lot of really great flavor. It's a fermented, just like miso is a fermented soy. This is not soy because we can't have soy, so it's a fermented chickpea version. I've also blended up some spices. You can see here I've got a lot of different spices. So I've used white pepper, onion, chili, garlic, and salt. I've used 2 teaspoons of each, except for the white pepper because it's very, very strong. I only use 1 teaspoon of that. And so by mixing it together, later when we put it into our recipe, we'll be able just to measure out the amount that it wants us to have of the blend. All right, and so I use this ginger that's already chopped. You can see that it's blended. It just saves time. It's organic. It's just nice and ready. I do love using ginger that's whole and ready. Sometimes it's seasonal, or do I have it on hand at the moment? So this is nice because it's on my shelf until I open it, and then it goes in the refrigerator. So those are some of the ingredients that we're going to be using. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to combine a cup of water in our mixing bowl that we're going to be mixing our dough in, and the coconut aminos. Oh, I hadn't opened it. There we go. And it's calling for 2 tablespoons. I like to pop off the little drizzle top because it takes too long to wait for it to squirt out. We're going to put 2 tablespoons of the soy sauce in here. And this is to flavor the water that we're going to make the dough with. And we want the dough to be as seasoned as possible because otherwise it kind of tastes like nothing. Wheat gluten is like literally just like eating wheat flour, but without any salt or flavor or anything like that. It's not going to taste like bread or anything like that. So that's why we're doing this. Then we're going to combine our flour. And the only 2 things we're going to add is our flour and our baking powder and our seasonings that I showed you earlier. So I'm going to grab a bowl for that. All right, so this recipe calls for 2 cups There's 1 cup. Two cups and a 4th. So often people ask, what gluten is. They've actually done the process of removing the gluten from the wheat flour. So if you have wheat flour, it's not the same thing as vital wheat gluten. This is the gummy part of wheat that often people can be sensitive to and therefore have to avoid eating wheat products as part of their diet because of the gluten that's in it. It's the stringy part, it's the gummy part that holds bread together and makes it delicious. But we're going to be using it just the gluten part, and you're going to see it turn to a real gummy. I call it a dumpling, but it's just very interesting. I'll touch it. Hopefully you'll be able to kind of see what's going on there. The next thing we're going to do is add the seasonings, and it calls for 2 tablespoons of the seasonings. And like I said, you want to do the full amount because that's what makes it taste really good. So we're going to mix these seasonings into our, I'm going to call it flour, but remember, it's this gluten flour, not regular wheat flour. And then we're going to be putting in a teaspoon of baking powder. And that's going to help it not necessarily rise, but it's definitely part of the recipe. All right, so we've got all of our ingredients for our flour. Now, this is the kind of the interesting part. So okay, so here is my flour mixture. Just looks like flour. But we're going to be adding this the water mixture to our flour. And so you can kind of see that we've got the soy sauce and the water is all that it is. And we're going to gradually add this. And as soon as it touches this liquid, I'm going to show you what happens. Or as soon as it hits the flour, it will start to really stiffen up. So I like to stir the first few pours because if I poured it in all at once, it would stiffen up just in one big glob. And I really need all the flour to be mixed in really well. Okay, so you can kind of see look, it's like getting hard and kind of stiff. It's weird. The first time you do it, you think, am I doing this right? Okay, so I'm going to save and use every piece of liquid because we need the flour to absorb into the liquid that we add to it. And it's going to form this dough. And I will get really messy making this recipe because I touch it with my hands. Okay, so that's all of the liquid that we have. And sometimes you'll find that it's not enough. And so we're going to get a little bit more water and just add it to it until we have the consistency that we need, which is basically all of the flour is mixed in to the dough. So right now you can see it's hard when I push down on it. But the only way we can get all of this flour to mix in is through the water. That's why this is so interesting to show you up close how this works. And then it just starts sticking to our mixture. And you may ask, well, oh no, you don't have enough, soy sauce in it because your first mixture had that combination of the water and soy sauce. But we're going to also be boiling this in a broth that we're going to make that also helps it have flavor as well. So you can see, I'm not going to add any more water. You can kind of see the water as I push into the dough. It's not pooling, but it's there. You can see it like moist dirt almost, where it's not quite soaking in. So I don't want to add any more flour, but I'm going to use this wet dough to get all of the flour from the sides of the bowl because I want to use all of it. The only way, again, that it's going to stick, the flour is going to stick is wherever it is wet. So sometimes you have to add a drop here and there. You can see I have a little bit of flour here in the bottom of the bowl. So I can add, I'm going to actually use my spoon to do it so that I don't do too much. And I want to get that flour wet so that it will stick to my fun dough that I just made. Okay, so the goal here is to keep the dough stiff. So you can see it's real stiff. It's not soft and fluffy and airy, but that's the consistency that you want this to be. And I'm only kneading it, or not really kneading it, but kind of mixing a little bit, because you can see these like dry patches, right? Because remember, this stuff, once the water hits, it just stiffens up and it doesn't really mix in. So really the only way I can get rid of that is by adding some water. So sometimes we do a little bit of this because we want it to be a real nice dough consistency and not have the dry patches. Now, if it does have those dry patches, you can go ahead and boil it and it turns out perfectly fine. But if you're worried about that because you noticed it, again, water's the only way to absorb that flour. Okay, so now we've got our dough and we've got all the flour from around the edges and stuff mixed in. And we are going to, I like to knead it in the bowl like I'm doing, just kind of pushing down, nothing major. But it's going to need a rest. So after we've done this for 2 or 3 minutes of poking it around, making sure that we got all that flour that's probably in the middle, mixed in real good. You can see it's got like a fun texture to it. It is really stiff and it makes your hands a little tired doing this. We're going to let it rest for 15 minutes. So what I'm going to do while it's resting is I'm going to show you how to cook the broth. The next step is going to be making the broth. And that way it'll be ready for this dough when it's done resting. So I'm going to set it over here, put a towel over it to let it rest for 15 minutes. All right. So I've got my pot of water. I've filled it halfway with water. We want it to be pretty full so that when we put the dumplings in, they have a lot of water to work with. I'll show you that process. That's very interesting as well. But the ingredients that we're going to put into the broth is going to be the miso, the chickpea miso, or a bouillon cube, or any sort of bouillon that you have. We're going to put that into the water to flavor it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my burner on so that water will start boiling. It does take it a little while, so it's perfect to do it while your dough is resting. So I'm going to take my miso and put it right into the water. It's going to need to dissolve. It'll take a little bit of heat to do that. And then it also calls for some more of the soy sauce. I'm not always a really super good measurer. It calls for 2 tablespoons. I often like to just dump some in. Put a little extra. I really like the way it tastes. The other thing that I really like the way it tastes in this broth is the ginger. And like I said, if you have fresh ginger, you don't even have to peel it. You can cut it and slice it, or you can throw a whole piece of ginger in the water, and it'll steep and make it really flavorful. So we're going to do at least a tablespoon of the ginger, because like I said, it's a real nice flavor. Okay, I'm going to show you what this looks like. Right now we just got broth, and you can see the chunk of miso that's in there. I'm just going to stir it to get the miso to dissolve so that our broth will not have any lumps, and it will dispense all of the flavor through all of the water. All right, so now we're going to wait for this to boil. Welcome back. It's been at least 15 minutes. We've let our dough sit. Still looks the same, but I'm going to show you the next stages. It's pretty easy. We put it out onto the cutting board, and we are going to cut it into what I call boilable, it's a hard thing to say. Boilable sizes. So sizes that are good for boiling. So right now they'll call this meat. This is the seitan meat, and it's just the dough. And so I like to cut off sections that are not too thick, because you're going to watch it in this pot of boiling water grow. So I do about ½ inch size to slice it up. Maybe not quite a ½ inch, maybe more like 1/4 of an inch, but not too thick, because we're going to be cutting it again later. So right now, and it will start to stick to each other, to itself. So sometimes we have to be really careful about that. I'm taking the lid off of the broth pan and just double checking that it's starting to boil. And it smells good. We've made the broth with the ginger, the soy sauce, and the miso for our bouillon. So it could be a bouillon, a vegetable, a chicken, whatever you want. So I'm going to stick these back in the bowl. They are going to stick to each other just a little bit. But that way we can chop up the rest of it. So we want it to all be ready as soon as the water is ready, so that we can drop them in at the same time. And if you've ever made dumplings before, they will float once they have either absorbed enough water or they've gotten lighter, but it's fun to watch, so you kind of know that they're ready to be boiled once they've floated to the top. It doesn't mean they're done. Typically with dumplings, it will mean that they're done being cooked when they float. That's not the case with these. And you can see that it does have some of the dry patches. It's okay. They're going to cook up nicely as soon as it hits the water. Water will hit that flour, and you won't even know that it was there. Okay, so these are our meat slices, we call them, with the gluten flour. And you can see the broth has gotten a little bit darker just from the ingredients getting to know each other, as I call it. Give it one last stir, and we are going to start dropping our dumplings in. Now, when I do this, it's going to be tough to show you because the camera's not actually over the stove. So I'm going to move it over here to my cutting board and show you what it looks like when we put these in. Then we're going to stick it back on the stove so it can keep boiling. Okay, you can see they sink when I put them in. Oh, it smells so good. It smells like an Asian soup. I just kind of unstick them from each other. And look, some of them already started boiling or floating to the top. So that's really fun. Now, you can see the size that they were when we started, right? They are going to double, if not triple, in size when they really start boiling. Okay? And it's going to take up a lot of my pot. That's why we wanted to make sure we only had a half pot full of water, because you need space for all this expansion that's going to happen. And we have to cook this for ½ an hour. So I won't keep you during that time, but just know that while these dumplings are boiling, they're going to keep growing. I'm going to show them to you. I'm going to put it back on. I'm going to put it back on the stove, and I'm going to dunk them under the water and kind of put the lid on. The lid won't last for very long because they will start to really, really boil. And then as they boil, sometimes they've even boiled enough that they've kind of pushed the lid off of the pan. And so I cracked it just to kind of be prepared for it. But I'll show you again as soon as we get our first rumbling boil, and you can kind of see them expanding. But then just know I'm going to be doing that for ½ an hour, for 30 minutes. Every few minutes, I'm going to dunk them under the water to keep them boiling, because otherwise if they're floating, they're kind of all sitting on the top of the water. And it gets that flavor in there from the broth. It kind of soaks into the dumpling dough. And then we'll go to the next step after that. that's where we're at right now. We're just going to wait for this to boil, show you the next step. It's not quite there yet. I'm just kind of pushing them under the water just a little bit, just because that helps them soften up and expand. So we will see you back here in a few minutes. All right, our seitan has been boiling for 30 minutes. I've continually been pushing down the dumplings into the hot water as they kind of grow and poof up. I'm sure that's a technical word, but I'm going to show them to you. We've got, they've grown, although you can probably tell by looking at it that they've fallen. So they had poofed up in about the 15-minute mark, and then they definitely lost air and became more deflated looking. So the next step is we're going to go ahead and take out the dumplings out of the broth, and I'm going to show you just by putting one on the cutting board. Okay. Now this is what I'm going to do with all of them. I would take all of them out of the broth, and usually I would let it cool before I cut them because they're going to be hot. But I'm going to slice them into slices like this. And this may be how you've seen it. If you've ever seen raw seitan before it's been seasoned, it kind of, some people say it looks a little bit like chicken, kind of has that texture to it. It's really too hot to touch, but this is the last step, and technically now it's ready to be put into a container that you could store in the refrigerator. You would want to cover these sliced dumpling pieces with some of the liquid. You can also save the liquid from this broth to use, like, to make a soup, because it kind of smells a lot like a ramen soup broth. But you would just need to make sure that anybody that's eating the soup can have wheat gluten, because the gluten will be in the broth. But these are ready now to let them cool off, and then you can use them in recipes. Often this is something that people that are vegetarian or vegan will use as a meat replacement. They'll put it, into a stir-fry dish, or you can put barbecue sauce on it or anything like that. And because there's not a lot of flavor to these pieces, they'll absorb the flavor that the dish you're putting them in. So it's kind of nice. That's similar to like what tofu does, but this is a change. If somebody doesn't just want to eat tofu, there's less fat in this, like almost none, compared to tofu, which does have fat, which is a good fat, but it does have fat in it if that's something that somebody's trying to keep balanced in their life. And it also, if someone can't have soy, this is a good way that they can have something that they can use in a dish. So I wanted to show you one last thing, and that is how I like to make it. And so I'm going to put these sliced pieces that are ready into my air fryer, and I want to show you how I like to crisp them up into a dish that makes them almost like maybe like a chicken nugget or something like that, where it's just kind of poofy and more done. So I'll see you back here in a few minutes, and I'll explain what I've done in the air fryer. All right, welcome back. I put our seitan dumplings. So here's what they look like when they're raw. They had come out of the water, and I chopped them up. And these I will show you what I'm going to do with next. But here's what I did in the air fryer. I stuck them this much in the air fryer for 12 minutes, and it makes them kind of crunchy on the outside. They're still done on the inside, but they are a little bit soft. I like to eat them just like this. You could add barbecue sauce or any sort of seasoning or anything like that, but I I just enjoy them plain because they do have a good flavor with the seasonings that we put in there. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you what I do. I'm going to show you what I do with these noodles. I call them noodles, but like a dumpling. I would either put them in a container with a lid and cover them with some of the broth liquid if I wanted to store them in the refrigerator. You can store them for about a week that way and take them out anytime you want to use them. You can saute them in a pan to make stir fry or to do, to put them in a dish where meat could be. Or like I like to do, I like to put them in the air fryer. And I eat about this much on the days that I choose to eat this. This gives me a really good serving portion of protein without a lot of fat, which is just something that's important to me to make sure I'm getting enough protein in my diet every day. But with all of this is one batch. So you remember we did 2 cups and 1/4 of the wheat gluten in our bowl of dough. And this is what we came out with. We came out with this much of our finished product. I like to put them in, I have these reusable bags. I already have them labeled and ready. And I put in a serving size, which is about this size for me. It's about a cup into each bag, and then I freeze them. And so I stick, how much I want in there. It doesn't have to have the liquid in there when I stick it in the freezer. And then I'm able to just pull them out. They defrost really nicely in the bag. I squeeze out all the air and I stick them in my freezer, and then I can take them out a day in advance or just the day of, and they defrost pretty quick. And so then I've got serving sizes ready to go, because I don't want to make this all the time, because as you can see, it was kind of time consuming. We made sure that we didn't have you sit through the half an hour of stirring them and stuff, but I think it's well worth it because this is such a better product than what you can get when you buy it. I have bought it before just to kind of compare and to see. And not only was it expensive, but it was more of almost like if you were to pull like shredded chicken, like kind of that type of a texture, which isn't a bad thing either. But I have gotten used to eating them in my little crispy nugget form that I like this. And so it was hard for me to even try to eat the store-bought ones. And I like having control over my ingredients, knowing exactly what's in it. There's nothing added in it that we can't have. And so that I know it's really going to be good for my body personally. And so that's what's nice, is that you can alter it for you and your needs. So thanks for joining us today. I look forward to teaching you more things in the future in Kaisa's Kitchen. So for now, see you later.